The bill for the tasting menu at Aurelia sat in the center of the table like an unexploded grenade. $1,450. My father Douglas swirled his Pinot Noir, looking at me with that familiar heavy disdain. "How does it feel?" he asked, his voice booming loud enough for the neighboring table to hear, being the only one here with no real legacy. He meant no husband, no children, just a high-stakes career that happened to pay for the vintage wine he was currently drinking. My mother giggled nervously, my sister Tiffany smirked behind her craft cocktail. The shame usually worked. It usually made me reach for my wallet just to make the feeling stop. But tonight the shame didn't come. Only a cold, sharp clarity. I looked at the check. "How does it feel?" I said, my voice terrifyingly calm, knowing this legacyless one won't be funding your lifestyle anymore. I dropped the unpaid check onto his plate right on top of his half-eaten ribeye. And then I walked out. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. And tell me, have you ever been the ATM for your family? I want to hear your story. The heavy door of my Audi slammed shut, sealing me inside a bubble of leather-scented silence. Outside, the valet was watching me, probably wondering why the woman in the emerald silk dress was sitting in the dark, staring at her phone like it was a detonator. In a way, it was. I waited for the tears. I waited for the familiar crushing weight of guilt, the panic that I had gone too far, the desperate urge to run back inside and apologize with my credit card in hand. That was the script I had followed for 29 years. But tonight the stage was dark. My hands were not shaking. My breathing was steady. The anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. It felt like the cool, sharp edge of a scalpel. I unlocked my phone. The blue light illuminated the dashboard as I opened my banking app. Face ID recognized me instantly, granting access to the control room of my family's survival. I navigated to the Scheduled Transfers tab. It was a long list, a digital testament to my own exploitation. First was the mortgage, the estate. My parents refused to downsize from the 5-bedroom colonial mansion that sat on 2 acres of prime real estate, even though my father hadn't earned a steady paycheck since 2015. For 5 years, $4,500 had left my account on the first of every month. It was the price of admission to a family that didn't even like me. It was rent for a room I wasn't even allowed to sleep in. I tapped the line item. The app asked me if I was sure. I didn't hesitate. I tapped Cancel Recurring Payment. Next was the Platinum Supplementary Card. My mother called it the grocery card. It was supposed to be for essentials. But when I looked at the recent activity, I didn't see supermarkets. I saw Serenity Spa, Nordstrom, and the wine cellar. She was buying unconditional love for herself with my money while offering me nothing but conditional tolerance. I selected the card management screen. I didn't just lock it. I reported it lost and requested the account be closed. Then there was Tiffany. My sister. The golden child. The legacy. The entry read Range Rover lease payment. $780 a month. It was a graduation gift for a degree she never finished because she was too busy building her personal brand. I had been paying for the vehicle that carried her from brunch to brunch while I worked 80-hour weeks in a lab. I clicked Stop Payment. One by one I went down the list. The landscaping crew. The pool maintenance. The country club dues that kept up their social appearances. I was not just cutting them off. I was dismantling the entire infrastructure of their delusion. It took exactly 4 minutes. When the screen refreshed, the Scheduled Transfers section was blank. 0. A terrifying sensation washed over me. It wasn't regret. It was the vertigo of sudden freedom. For a decade, I had been the load-bearing wall of a crumbling house. Now I had stepped away, and gravity was about to do its job. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text from my mother. Then another. Then a call from my father. They must have realized the bill at the table wasn't being picked up. They were probably scrambling, realizing their cards were maxed out, looking for the safety net they had just spent 2 hours spitting on. I silenced the phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. I pressed the ignition button. The engine purred to life, a deep, powerful sound that vibrated through the steering wheel. I shifted into drive and pulled out of the parking lot, merging onto the highway under the glow of the city lights. I didn't look back at the restaurant. I didn't look at the phone lighting up the darkness of the passenger seat. I just drove. For the first time in my life, I wasn't driving toward an obligation. I was driving away from a debt I had finally decided to default on. My apartment was exactly how I liked it, quiet, white, and completely empty of other people. It was the only place in the world where I wasn't defined by what I could provide. I kicked off my heels and walked straight to my home office. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. The glow from the city outside was enough. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. My fingers moved automatically, navigating to a password-protected folder deep in my hard drive. I opened a spreadsheet I had named the black hole. The screen filled with rows and columns. 5 years of data. Every mortgage payment, every bailout, every loan that was never repaid, every extravagant dinner I had quietly covered to avoid a scene. I scrolled to the bottom. The cell in the corner was highlighted in red. $380,412. I stared at the number. It wasn't just a figure, it was a house I hadn't bought. It was the travel I hadn't taken. It was a retirement fund for a life I hadn't started living yet. For a long time, I told myself this was just what good daughters did. I told myself I was generous. But looking at that sum in the harsh blue light of the monitor, I finally admitted the truth. This wasn't generosity. It was a transaction. I closed my eyes and suddenly I was 10 years old again. It was the night of the regional science fair. I was standing in the gymnasium holding a blue first-place ribbon waiting near the double doors. I had waited for 2 hours. When my mother finally pulled up in the minivan, she didn't even turn off the engine. I climbed into the back seat, bursting to show her the ribbon. But before I could speak, she held up a hand. "Not now, Adriana," she had sighed, looking exhausted. "Tiffany chipped a nail at dance practice and she's been hysterical for an hour. My head is splitting." In the front seat, my 7-year-old sister was sobbing over a microscopic scratch on her pinky finger. My father was rubbing her back, cooing at her, promising her ice cream to make it better. I sat there in the dark back seat, quietly sliding my blue ribbon into my pocket until it crumpled. I didn't cry. I didn't demand attention. I simply realized that in the economy of my family, needs were a currency and I was bankrupt. Tiffany got love because she demanded it. I got tolerated because I required nothing. That night, the parentified child was born. I learned that to be safe, I had to be invisible, and to be seen, I had to be useful. I opened my eyes and looked back at the spreadsheet. That little girl in the back seat had grown up, but the dynamic hadn't changed. It had just gotten more expensive. I had spent 20 years trying to buy the affection they gave Tiffany for free. I thought if I just wrote a big enough check, if I solved a big enough crisis, if I saved the house one more time, the transaction would finally clear. I thought I could pay the entry fee to be their daughter. But love isn't a subscription service. You shouldn't have to renew it every month with a bank transfer. I looked at the cursor blinking on the screen. The love tax had been collecting interest for decades, draining me not just of money but of self-worth. I had believed that my value lay in my utility, that I was only as good as the problems I could fix for them. Tonight at that dinner table, my father hadn't just insulted me. He had voided the contract. He made it clear that no matter how much I paid, I would never be enough. I would always be the legacyless one, the ATM in the corner useful only until the cash ran out. Well, the machine was out of order. I moved the cursor to the file menu. I didn't delete the file. I needed the evidence. Instead, I created a new folder, titled Evidence. I dragged the spreadsheet inside. Then I opened a new document. I typed a single line at the top. Notice of eviction. If they wanted to treat our relationship like a business, I was finally going to act like a CEO. I was liquidating the asset, and I was starting with the house they were living in on my dime. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I didn't block their numbers immediately. I needed to document the escalation for what was coming next. My phone buzzed incessantly on my desk at Biogen, vibrating against the stainless steel surface like a trapped insect. I watched the notifications roll in. They followed a predictable, almost scripted pattern. First came the guilt. Mom, 8:15 a.m. Your father hasn't slept all night. He's having chest pains. I hope you're happy. Call us immediately. Then came the entitlement. Tiffany, 9:30 a.m. What the fuck, Adriana? My card got declined at the venue. I have a brand launch in 3 days. You are literally ruining my career. Fix it now. Then came the public shaming. A notification from Facebook popped up. Douglas had posted a status update. It's a tragedy when children forget who raised them. Some people let a little success go to their heads and leave their family behind. Prayers needed for the ungrateful. I saw my aunt and 3 cousins had already commented with praying hands emojis and "Stay strong, Douglas." I didn't respond to a single message. I didn't defend myself in the comments. I treated their outburst exactly like what it was, a temper tantrum from toddlers who had been told no for the first time in their lives. But silence is dangerous to people who feed on attention. When I didn't bite the bait, they didn't stop. They escalated. I was in the middle of a high-level briefing with the VP of Research when the conference room door opened. The receptionist looked pale. "Adriana," she whispered, interrupting the presentation. "I'm so sorry." The room went silent. My boss looked at me with concern. My stomach turned, but my face remained stone. I walked out, picked up the receiver at the desk, and pressed it to my ear. "Is someone dying?" I asked. "How dare you?" Patricia's voice clawed through the line loud enough that I had to pull the phone away. "You embarrassed us at the club. Do you know the Smiths were asking why your father's card was declined? You unfreeze that account right now, Adriana. We have a reputation." I hung up. I stood there in the sterile hallway of my billion-dollar company staring at the receiver. She had lied to my workplace. She had used the phrase life or death to bypass security, jeopardizing my professional standing, all because of a declined credit card at a country club. In that moment, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. For years, I thought they just needed help. I thought they were just bad with money. But this wasn't about survival. If they were truly desperate for food or shelter, they would have asked for that. They weren't asking for help. They were demanding submission. I realized I wasn't just a daughter or a bank account to them. I was their supply. In the world of psychology, narcissistic supply is the admiration, attention, and sense of power a narcissist extracts from others to prop up their fragile ego. By cutting off the money, I hadn't just inconvenienced them financially. I had cut off their drug. Their rage wasn't the panic of the destitute. It was the withdrawal symptoms of an addict who had lost their fix. They didn't want my money. They wanted my compliance. They wanted to drag me back down into the hierarchy where they were the kings and queens and I was the servant who cleaned up the mess. Calling my job was a tactical strike. They knew my career was the source of my independence. If they could sabotage it or make me afraid of losing it, I would fall back in line. I walked back into the conference room. "Everything okay?" my boss asked. "Yes," I said, sitting down and opening my laptop. "Just a wrong number. It won't happen again." I wasn't going to play their game anymore. I wasn't going to fight them with texts or tears. I was done being the supply. It was time to bring in a professional. Mr. Sterling wasn't a therapist. He didn't offer tissues or sympathetic nods. He was a forensic accountant and family law attorney who charged $800 an hour to eviscerate financial bullies. He was exactly what I needed. His office was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the financial district. I sat across from him at a mahogany table that felt wide enough to land a plane on. Between us sat a thick stack of manila folders, the physical manifestation of my black hole spreadsheet. Sterling flipped through the pages. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic snap of paper as he turned them. His face was unreadable, a mask of professional indifference until he stopped at the summary page. He looked up. His eyes were gray and cold. $380,000, he stated. "Yes," I said, my voice tight. "My father. He's had a hard time finding work. And the house is expensive to maintain." "The house isn't in your name, Adriana." "No, it's their legacy." Sterling closed the file. "It's not a legacy." He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. "Do you know what the sunk cost fallacy is, Adriana?" "I'm an analyst," I said. "Of course. It's the tendency to continue an endeavor once an investment in money, effort, or time has been made." "Exactly," Sterling turned back to me. "You've spent nearly $500,000 buying stock in a company that has never paid a dividend. You keep pouring money in, subconsciously believing that if you just pay a little more, the stock will finally rebound. You think the next check will be the one that makes them love you." I looked down at my hands. The truth of it stung more than the insults at the dinner table. "But here is the reality," Sterling continued, walking back to the table. "This isn't just bad investment strategy. This is coercive financial control. It's a form of domestic abuse." "Abuse?" I bristled slightly. "They didn't hit me." "They didn't have to," he said sharply. "They conditioned you to believe your survival and theirs depended on your financial submission. They sabotaged your boundaries, guilt-tripped your success, and jeopardized your career to keep you tethered. You aren't a daughter to them, Adriana. You are an asset class, and a depreciating one at that." He pointed to the file. If you continue this trajectory, you will be bankrupt by 40. They will still be living in that mansion and they will still be calling you useless. The word hung in the air. Useless. I took a deep breath. The guilt that had been gnawing at me, the voice saying, "But they're your parents," suddenly went silent. Sterling was right. I wasn't fighting family. I was fighting a hostile takeover of my life. "What do we do?" I asked. Sterling sat down and uncapped a fountain pen. "We go scorched earth. First, I draft a cease and desist regarding the harassment at Biogen. If your mother calls your office again, we sue for tortious interference. Second, we execute a full asset check. I want to see exactly where your money went. Because looking at these numbers, something doesn't add up." He pushed a retainer agreement across the table. "I need your authorization to pull everything. Credit reports, public records, hidden accounts, everything." I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. "Burn it down," I said. And I signed my name. A week later, my phone rang. It was Sterling. "Can you come to the office?" he asked. "Now." His voice didn't have the usual professional detachment. It had an edge, a warning. I canceled my afternoon meetings and drove straight to the financial district. When I walked into the conference room, the atmosphere was heavy. Sterling didn't stand up to shake my hand. He was staring at a new, thinner file on the desk. He waited until I sat down. "We found something," he said. "It wasn't in the standard credit report. These were commercial business loans. 3 of them. Opened 2 years ago." I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. "Opened by whom?" "By you," Sterling said. "Or rather by someone using your social security number, your previous address, and a forged signature." He slid a paper across the glass table. "Total principal amount $95,000. I stared at the number. 95,000. My mind immediately raced to the usual suspects. "Let me guess," I said, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. "A timeshare in Cabo. A new boat for my father. Did my mother need a wardrobe update for the season?" I reached for the paper, shaking my head. I shouldn't be surprised. They felt entitled to my income, so why not my credit score too? Adriana Sterling interrupted. His voice was quiet. "It wasn't for lifestyle spending." I stopped. We traced the disbursements. The money didn't go to a resort or a dealership. It went to a law firm. And a private settlement fund. He opened the folder to reveal a police report. A mugshot was clipped to the front. It was Tiffany. 2 years ago, Sterling explained, your sister was involved in an incident, a DUI. She crashed her Range Rover into a parked car. There was significant property damage, and a passenger in the other vehicle who threatened to press charges. I froze. I remembered that time. My parents had told me Tiffany was exhausted and taking a mental health break at a wellness retreat. They had asked me for $5,000 for therapy. I had given it to them without question. They needed it to go away, Sterling continued. Tiffany was just starting her influencer career. A DUI would have ruined her brand deals. So they settled out of court. The other driver signed a non-disclosure agreement. The damages were paid in full. He tapped the loan documents. But they didn't have the cash. And they couldn't take out a loan because their credit was already ruined. So they used yours. The room seemed to tilt. They hadn't just stolen money to buy things. They had stolen my identity to protect her. I was the shield. I was the body armor they strapped on to take the bullet so the golden child wouldn't get a scratch. They were willing to saddle me with nearly $100,000 of debt, willing to risk me going to prison for fraud if I ever defaulted, just to make sure Tiffany didn't have to face the consequences of her own actions. She was the asset to be protected. I was the resource to be consumed. I felt bile rise in my throat. I stood up abruptly and walked to the corner of the room, bracing my hand against the cool glass of the window. I breathed in, then out, forcing the nausea down. For years, I had told myself they loved us both, just differently. That was a lie. They loved her. They used me. When I turned back to Sterling, the sickness was gone. The sadness was gone. There was only a cold, terrifying emptiness where my loyalty used to be. "Draft the affidavit," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to a stranger. Adriana Sterling warned, "Once we file this, it triggers a criminal investigation. This is identity theft, wire fraud, grand larceny. We are talking about felony charges." "I know what we are talking about," I replied. "I'm not paying for her mistakes anymore. draft the papers. The gravel crunching under the tires of Sterling's black sedan was the only sound as we rolled up the long manicured driveway of the estate. The house loomed ahead, a sprawling, white-pillared monument to money my parents didn't have and a status they hadn't earned. I walked up the steps, Sterling a silent shadow beside me. I didn't knock. I used my key, the one I had paid for 1,000 times over. We found them in the sitting room. It was a tableau of delusion. Douglas was reading a golf magazine. Patricia was arranging hydrangeas. Tiffany was scrolling on her phone looking bored. When they saw me, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Not to fear, but to smug satisfaction. They thought I had broken. They thought I was there to apologize, reactivate the credit cards, and resume my post as the family servant. Well, Patricia said, not even looking up from her flowers, I knew you'd come to your senses. I hope you brought a cashier's check, Adriana. The landscaping bill is overdue. Douglas tossed the magazine onto the coffee table. You have a lot of making up to do, young lady. That scene at the restaurant was unforgivable. I didn't say a word. I simply nodded to Sterling. He stepped forward and placed his briefcase on the antique coffee table. The click of the latches opening sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. He pulled out the dossier, the police report, the loan documents, the forensic tracing of the IP address. Mr. and Mrs. Vance Sterling said, his voice level and devoid of emotion. We aren't here for the landscaping bill. We are here to discuss 3 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of identity theft, and 1 count of grand larceny totaling $95,000. The smugness vanished from Douglas's face. Tiffany stopped scrolling. Who is this? Douglas demanded, his face reddening. And what the hell are you talking about? This is Mr. Sterling, I said coldly. He is a forensic accountant, and he knows about the loans you took out in my name to pay off Tiffany's settlement. Silence. Absolute suffocating silence. Patricia dropped a hydrangea stem. Tiffany shrank back into the cushions, her face pale. That was a family matter, Douglas stammered, his bluster losing steam. We did what we had to do to protect your sister. You have plenty of credit. With what income? Sterling asked sharply. You are insolvent, Mr. Vance. And borrowing money in someone else's name without consent isn't a family matter. It is a felony. In this state, fraud over $50,000 carries a mandatory prison sentence of 5 to 10 years. Prison, Patricia gasped, clutching her pearls I probably bought. You would send your own parents to prison over money? You were willing to send me to debtor's prison for a crime I didn't commit, I countered. You risked my career, my freedom, and my future to save Tiffany's reputation. You made your choice. I stepped closer to the table. But I am generous. I am offering you a settlement. 1 chance to stay out of handcuffs. I laid a single sheet of paper on top of the evidence. Option A, Mr. Sterling files this police report immediately. You will be arrested. The story of Tiffany's DUI will become public record during the trial. You will lose everything. Douglas looked at the paper, sweat beading on his forehead. And option B? Option B, I said. You list this house for sale within 48 hours. The proceeds will first pay off the fraudulent loans in my name, then they will reimburse me for the $200,000 in mortgage payments I made over the last 4 years. You walk away with whatever is left. Sell the house, Douglas roared. This is our legacy. We've lived here for 20 years. It's not your legacy, I said quietly. It's my liability, and I'm liquidating it. You can't do this, Tiffany whined from the sofa. Where am I supposed to live? I looked at my sister. The golden child. The reason for the crime. Get a job, Tiffany, I said. I hear retail is hiring. I turned back to Douglas. Sterling uncapped a pen and held it out. The police station is a 10-minute drive, Mr. Vance Sterling said, checking his watch. Or you sign the agreement to sell. You have 30 seconds. Douglas looked at Patricia, who was sobbing silently. He looked at Tiffany, who couldn't even meet his eyes. Then he looked around the room at the crown molding and the expensive furniture, realizing the performance was finally over. He snatched the pen from Sterling's hand. With a shaking hand, he signed the death warrant of his facade. Get out, he whispered, tossing the pen down. You are no daughter of mine. I picked up the signed agreement, checking the signature. It was valid. I know, I said, feeling lighter than I had in 20 years. I'm just the bank, and I'm closing your account. 3 months later, the heavy iron gates of the estate were locked tight. A real estate sign swung in the breeze, slapped with a bright red sticker, sold. My parents moved into a 2-bedroom rental near the highway. It was clean, functional, and completely devoid of the prestige they had worshipped for 40 years. My father had to sell his golf clubs, my mother had to learn to cook. And Tiffany, she got a job at a makeup counter at the mall. It turns out influencing doesn't pay the rent when the bank of Dad and the bailout fund of Adriana is permanently closed. I sat on the back patio of my new house. It wasn't a mansion. It was a modest, mid-century modern, with good bones and a small wild garden I was planting myself. There were no pillars, no marble floors, and no guest wing. But every square inch of it belonged to me. My phone buzzed on the teak table. I picked it up. A notification from my bank app flashed across the screen. Wire transfer received $295,000. The proceeds from the sale. It covered the $95,000 in fraud and the $200,000 in mortgage payments I had made over the years. It didn't pay back the emotional debt, nothing could do that, but it balanced the books. I looked out at the garden. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the grass. The air was quiet. No frantic texts. No guilt-tripping voicemails. No emergency demands for validation. For 29 years I thought my legacy was what I could build for them. I thought I was only worth the shelter I provided. But sitting there in the silence, listening to the wind in the trees, I realized the truth. I wasn't their ATM. I wasn't their retirement plan. And I certainly wasn't their legacy. I took a sip of tea and deleted the black hole spreadsheet from my phone forever. I am my own legacy. And for the first time in my life, I am rich in the only currency that matters: peace. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to know that walking away from toxic family isn't failure, it's survival. Thanks for listening.